Good afternoon and welcome to this workshop on 360 feedback and how to get more engagement for your 360 feedback, particularly for leadership programs. It's called Build It and They Will Come. My name is Joey Uby. I'm Senior Consultant and Co-founder at Track 360. And we specialize in designing and implementing 360-degree feedback. So what do I mean by the question, build it and they will come? So what's the challenge here? So let me share my slide with you. And let's make a start. If you build it, they will come. Now, I don't know, depending on your age, you may or may not remember this, but it was a film with Kevin Costner in it way back in 1989. And it was about somebody who built a baseball field, baseball pitch, for these ghosts to come back. And he was worried about how he was going to attract them. And somebody said, don't worry, if you build it, they will come. So that's a nice idea. Unfortunately, in today's workplace where people are busy and got lots and lots of things on their plate, then being engaged with 360 might not be their first priority. But there are things that you can do, and that's what we're going to cover today, to help to bring that more engagement to your 360. Now, that's what I'm going to talk about. Please feel free to drop in your questions and I will try to answer them before the session, or I will answer them afterwards and show them on LinkedIn. So what's the challenge? So here's the challenge. That if you don't have enough engagement with the 360 that you've built, then you don't have enough feedback to maintain anonymity, which is a key part of the 360, people's trust in the 360. You don't have enough feedback for quality. So if you don't get enough feedback for each individual, quality may not be as good. And poor quality feedback ratings and comments, all of those things lead to poor insight. And therefore, the whole purpose of the 360 is to gain insight for that person in that leadership or aspiring to be a leader. And how that looks, on paper, for example, in a report. So here we've got someone who you can see he's had feedback from 2 direct reports and only 1 peer. So when you start to look at how the feedback ratings in this case are averaging out, if you've got a group of direct reports or a group of peers and you're only getting a small amount, then the averages may not be indicative. They may not be as accurate as they should be. And therefore, you're kind of wondering whether that's going to be actually useful feedback for that individual. Whereas if we look at somebody in a similar situation, but that has feedback from 4 direct reports and even 3 peers, then you can see how that actually increases the believability, the credibility of the feedback that's coming through and the ratings that that person is receiving. Similarly, part of the issue is if they don't have much written feedback that's supporting their ratings, then again, the quality of the feedback is not going to be that helpful, and it's not going to help them with reflection and with awareness, which is what the 360 is all about. So I'm going to run through some really key hints and tips about designing and implementing an engaging Leadership 360 survey. So the first thing, and this has been actually proven by research to engage people, the first thing is that the content, so the 360 questionnaire, the questions that you ask and the topics that you talk about, are customized to your unique leadership strategy and what leadership behaviours look like for your organisation. That way, both the ratees, the leaders, and also the individuals giving the feedback will recognise those behaviours as being specific to the organisation. And you can then measure specifically against those skills. Because off-the-shelf 360s are fantastic, really good for individual development. But if you are looking at values or skill sets across the organization, then the more relevant the content is, the more people will engage with it and recognize it. So this is an example of a 360 that we ran a number of years ago. And you can see here that this organization is running a 360 based completely on the areas that they want to focus on. So the areas, the skill sets are values, behaviors, and respect at work. Now for this organization, that's particularly important. They are a public sector organization, and this is really key for them to pick up in their leadership. You can see managing emotions, taking responsibility, being accessible and visible, taking a considerate approach, and consulting. So you can see how that's built specifically around what they're looking to do. So that has helped to engage a lot of people in that process. So next up, the 360 should, to engage both the people giving the feedback, but also the people receiving them, especially them, the 360 should be an active element of leadership in the organization. And what I mean by that, it's not just a one-off that people use at a particular time in the leadership development program, for example, and then gets put away. Ideally, you should use it at the start, the middle, and the end of the actual program, but then continue to use it, incorporate it into the I suppose the fabric of leadership within the organization. So that same structure, that same 360 should come up as regular pulse surveys, identifying new leaders, identifying leadership skills, and also leadership gaps. So if it's part of what the organization does across the whole area, then it's going to be more engaging and more familiar and more of a core tool that's used in your organization. I've mentioned this slightly before, but it's very important that for engagement, the 360 language should look, sound, and feel like it belongs to us. So as I showed you earlier on, that language, that approach was very specific to the organization. So it's got to sound like it belongs to us. It's got to feel like it belongs to us. If it's generic, if it's a bit, how can I put, a bit corporate, if that's not your culture, then people are going to feel it's just ticking the boxes. If it's specific around what you're doing, people are much more likely to engage with it. And then we have the actual statements, how the 360 questionnaire is structured and built. So if you're creating a bespoke 360, it should, goes without saying, be based on your leadership framework. But the way that you create that 360, what the questions look like, what you're asking people to respond to, should be specific and observable. And that's really critical for the work that we've done over the years, in that where you have 360s that are stated in vague terms or generic terms, so-and-so is a good leader, Joe is a good leader. What does that mean? We don't really know, because everyone has their own view of what a good leader looks like. So is a good communicator, is a bad communicator. They're very general things. And then you also have the psychological questions, how is Joe an introvert or an extrovert? Or people like to think that they understand what those things mean. So to avoid that and to make the 360 really robust, it's really important to build it around statements that are very specific, based on actions that people can see. And if I can see a specific action, I'm much more comfortable, and it's much easier for me to say, yes, I know what that looks like, and I can rate that. So in this example, for instance, delegates tasks that will help the team to learn and develop their skills. Now that's very, very specific, isn't it? So does this person delegate tasks that will help the team? And in this case, it's very easy for me to say, well, this person almost always does it, almost never does it. Similarly, building customer relationships, same thing, very specific, action-based 360 is much more likely to get a good response because people understand what it is you're asking them to observe and measure. Important one, it seems small, but it's actually quite important, is the length of the 360. I've seen very long questionnaires that clients have said they want to use, 70 questions, 100 questions, and the key to engagement is to keep it short and keep it as simple as possible. Now, don't worry if you can't actually see the questions in this particular slide, but as you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 skill sets. So these are the headings, and within them groups of skills that are rated, 4 in each, plus a text question and one final text question. So that makes it around 25 to 30 questions. Now you can have a few more, and you might have more than 4 skill sets or competencies. But overall, your questionnaire really shouldn't exceed 40 questions. Once you start going over that number, the respondents will start to become disengaged. And what that means is they will either not complete it, or they will just give quick responses without really thinking about them, which means that the feedback that the ratee receives might not be as good a quality as it might have been. So I would always recommend quality over quantity. And a 360 shouldn't really be looking for a whole load of skills. It's really looking at key skills for that role. And really highly recommend keeping the 360 short and simple. So we then move on to the process itself. So how do we make it easy and rewarding for the leaders to both ask for feedback and to self-assess? Well, a feedback culture, asking for feedback, needs to be in place when you run a 360. And making it easy for the leaders, let's talk about self-assessment first. It's important that they have the time and the opportunity to reflect. So the 360 should include a self-assessment, because that will be compared against the feedback that they receive from their colleagues. And that's an important indicator of how self-aware they are, but it also builds up their self-awareness. So the 360 is a great opportunity for leaders to have a really good opportunity to reflect on their own skills. So one of the things that is important is to give them time to do that. So as part of the preparation for their leadership journey, the time to understand how to self-assess and to do the self-assessment. And making it easy for them is part of an overall process, which I will talk about in a few minutes. But it shouldn't be a complicated, long drawn out process that makes it difficult for them to do. So keeping the process as simple as possible is really important, and giving them time to think about it. And then for colleagues, so for their colleagues, make it easy and rewarding for them to give feedback. So how do we do that? We have a very simple mechanism for providing feedback. So make it really easy for me, if I'm asked to give feedback, to be able to go and do that. So make it available both on PCs, but also on mobile devices, because a lot of people will be using their mobile devices now. And make it really clear and easy as to what they need to do. And to make it rewarding, I guess that's got to do more with a culture of feedback, encouraging people, giving them trust in the process. So rather than something that they don't know what's going to be about, gosh, why am I being asked to do this? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Really making it rewarding and something that they actually want to do. And that's a lot about communication and about the culture of feedback in the organization. So are people used to giving feedback? Are they comfortable with it? And do they know what it's for? So if we talk further about the process, one thing that is important in getting engagement from the people who are going through the 360, the leaders, say if it's a leadership program, or even just a bespoke 360 that you run anyway, is making sure that feedback is coming from the right people. Now, when I say the right people, that means the right people for the person getting the feedback. So for example, if I don't get feedback from key people, then I might say, well, that's not relevant to me. If the feedback's coming from a certain person or people that I don't know or I haven't worked with, then I'm not going to value that feedback. So right from the start, we need to make sure that feedback is coming from people who are going to be in a position to give that valuable feedback. So normally that would be the person's line manager, their teams, their direct reports, as we've called them in this particular graph, and their peers. But it really does depend on the organization and the working relationships they have. So if I, for example, work across projects in a matrix in the organization with people who I don't have a formal working relationship with, I need to be able to get feedback from them, because that's important for me to get the feedback and to value that feedback and to be engaged with it. So if I find I'm getting feedback from people that I don't value their feedback, I'm not going to be engaged with that feedback when it comes through. So feedback from the right people. And we've talked about this before, feedback from enough people. So feedback from the right number of people so that the feedback is valid and it has some strength to it. And if one person is giving me feedback, giving me a low rating, I may or may not value that. But if a number of people are saying it, they're all saying the same thing, that feedback's going to be much more valuable to me, and I can't dismiss it even if I want to. So the right people and enough people, that's quite important. And engagement also for leaders is to allow them to choose some of their own raters. So while you might include all of the people that that person has a formal relationship with, it's a great idea to give the leaders the opportunity to ask for more feedback. First of all, it brings more feedback, which is we were talking about is always a good idea to get more, make it more valid. But also it gives them a input into the process. So they feel they're more involved and their need for feedback and the people they work with is being taken into account. Definitely improves engagement in my experience. So here, for example, we've got Bill, and we can see that his direct reports and line manager have been asked for feedback because we know about them, they're in the organization. But you can see there's also a button here that allows him to ask for more feedback. So that's a great opportunity for him to get involved, to ask people that he has worked with, potentially to ask other colleagues, to ask people in support functions if he works with them, even to ask clients and customers, because that might be very important in his role. So again, leaders to choose their own raters is quite important when it comes to engagement. So next up, so as well as the processes we've talked about, training is important and briefing. So pre-preparation really helps to engage people. It gets them excited, it gets them involved in what they're going to be doing. I've seen occasions where 360s are just thrown out. Here's 360, we're doing this, we'd like you to get involved, this is what's going to happen, please do a self-review. So, you know, it makes sense to involve people right at the beginning, help them to understand how to self-review. So we talked about that, and give them the opportunity to do that. But also, as part of that engagement, give them the opportunity to discuss their feedback with a coach or a colleague, and to create a development plan. And that's what I meant earlier on about the 360 being part of the fabric of the ongoing development of that person. So the more that you consult with them and help them to understand what it's about, they're going to be more engaged with it than if it's given to them and they say, great, I've got this, and they put it in a drawer. They put the paper report in a drawer, or the online report goes into their files and they don't think about it again. And engaging the raters is also about training and briefing in how to give constructive and honest feedback. Sometimes feedback is poor quality because people don't understand what they need to do. So, and they're not really engaged with it. So providing training and briefing, and also the message that what they're doing is important. It's part of the wider set of values and activities in this organization, and that it's something that could benefit them in the future as well. Firstly, they'll have better leaders to look up to, and it's something they might actually be able to do themselves. One thing I notice where 360 is engaging is often people will say, hey, I was asked to give feedback for Sabrina. This looks great. Can I have some? Can I do this program? So it can also be a brilliant way of getting more people to understand the development that you're doing as an organization and how they can get involved with that. So more engagement about reminding. So this is process. So using different media for reminding people. So it's a good idea, obviously, during the process to provide reminders to people to give the feedback they've been asked to give. Using different media helps to refresh that. So rather than just sending email after email, emails are fine if that's what you use in your organization. Think about how you might do reminders in a different way. So you might do a quick, very short video, you might do a quick pop-up on your learning management system. Just little things that remind people are very effective to keep that engagement going. Now, a communications plan is really critical, and this almost goes back to the beginning where you're designing your 360. So if we run through the things to include in your communications plan, firstly, think about who you're going to communicate to. So you may have a number of different stakeholders. You've got the people who are going to be getting feedback, the ratees, the people who are going to be giving feedback, so the raters, so they need to be included. But what about line managers? What's their role? So if you want them to be involved and to be engaged, you have to talk to them as well. And local HR business partners, they need to understand what's happening and what their role is and what they might be asked to do. If you've got a network of internal coaches or mentors, you might want to include them. So really it's important to think about all the different stakeholders, and they should know what it's for. So what is this feedback? What's the purpose? This one up here. Who's getting feedback? So who are these people that are going to be receiving feedback? And what's my role? Why am I being asked to give feedback? Why am I important in this process? And who else, who's giving feedback? So who else is being asked apart from me, and why? So openness and transparency in a communications plan is really important. If you're really open and clear about what you want this 360 to achieve, you will get more engagement. I can guarantee you that. And I can also guarantee if you don't do that, then, and you have people coming back and they'll then get an email saying, I've been asked to give feedback. What's this about? That is really poor for engaging people, and it gives a bad feeling and a negative response to the 360 altogether. When does it happen? So what's the program? What happens as a result of this, and who sees it? So if I'm going to give feedback for my boss, for instance, so if I give them maybe some constructive feedback, not altogether positive, not 100% positive, what's going to happen? Are they going to get into trouble? Are they going to get demoted? Is this going to go towards their performance or not? So that's important to not to forget those things. And also, who sees that feedback? Does my boss's boss see the feedback? Does it go to HR? So again, it's this transparency about, this clarity about what's going to happen with that feedback. Cut out unnecessary tasks now. Some organizations want to go through an approvals process. So they say to an individual, okay, Jay, we want you to get feedback from all of these. You tell us who you want to get feedback from and we'll approve them. That takes time, and it's can be a bit tedious as well. Now, some organizations really have to have that, and I understand that. But if you can offer some process that doesn't require too much approval time, and remember, you also want to treat people as adults too. So if you can avoid a long drawn out approvals process that's got to be checked by 3 different levels, then I would recommend that you do. If you can preload the raters, as we've said, because based on their organization relationships, then do that. And that will speed things up. And then the timing for best responses. So this is interesting because although it's a very process piece, it actually makes a difference to engagement, quite a big difference. So first of all, stagger your times if possible. So if you can stagger the times that the 360 is being completed, then do that if that's at all possible. So do it in groups rather than all in one big group. Do it outside the holiday season. I have a number of examples, or worked a number of times, where the client has insisted on running the 360 in July or August or over Christmas. And we know that people disengage at those times. So I'd seriously recommend you don't do that. Similarly, the year end. So what I mean by that, the financial year end. So when people are busy getting their numbers together, they shouldn't be distracted by the 360 process. Do it at the beginning of the year rather than the year end, and not at the same time as performance appraisals. So that's confusing. So if you're running your performance appraisals and you're asking for a 360 that's unrelated, then that's going to confuse people too. And be very clear that it's not to do with performance appraisals. And we recommend 2 to 3 weeks for the feedback to be gathered online, for people to give people enough time if they're away on holiday or they're very busy. And then finally, I've found the most important element for engagement with leadership is sponsorship, enthusiasm and example from leaders and influencers. And the most successful 360s are those where leaders have themselves gone through a 360, talk about their experience and what they've learned. And wow, the response and the engagement is so much better when you've got that. The picture I've shown you there is a guy called Vineet Nayar, and he was CEO of HCL Technologies for a number of years. And he put in place a 360. For him, 360 was all about upward feedback. And it was really important that managers and leaders understood how they were doing in the eyes of their teams. And his approach was so positive, and from him it was all about what he could learn from it, and therefore the other senior leaders in the organization were the same. So they had this massive feedback culture in the organization that made it very successful. I think we're just coming to the end of our 30 minutes. I just move to the next slide. So I hope that's helped in thinking about when you're going to do 360, particularly for leadership. It's not enough to just put it there and hope people will use it. There are some tips and tools that I've covered to really help people to engage and really run with the 360. If you've got questions, then I'd be delighted to answer those. Please direct message me. And what I will do is I will share, not your identity, but I will share the question on LinkedIn so that, and the answer, so that other people can benefit from that too. So please do contact me if you have any more questions. I'd be delighted to help. And finally, I will leave you with this slide from my favorite cartoon character, who is Dilbert. I will leave you to think about this one, and I will end the broadcast in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure to speak to you. Have a great day.